Case 1. Andrea Yates, June 20th, 2001, Harris County, Houston, Texas. There are cases in the criminal justice record of Harris County, Texas, that become more than court files. They become turning points. They become the cases that reshape how a community understands mental health, family crisis, and the systems that are supposed to catch people before they fall. The case of Andrea Yates is one of those turning points. It is not a case that this community has forgotten. It is a case that this community has spent more than 2 decades trying to understand. And in understanding it, advocates, lawmakers, mental health professionals, and grieving families have worked together to make sure that what happened on June 20th, 2001, never happens again. That is why we cover it. That is why it matters. That is why the story of 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary Yates, must be told with full accuracy, full dignity, and full respect for who they were and what they deserved. The Yates family lived at 942 Beachcomber Lane in the Clear Lake area of Houston, Texas. By the summer of 2001, the household had become a place of mounting crisis that very few people outside its walls fully understood. Andrea Kennedy Yates was 36 years old. She was a former nurse. She was by every external measure a devoted mother who had homeschooled her children and centered her entire life around her family. Her husband, Russell Yates, worked as a computer engineer at NASA. From the outside, the family looked functional. From the outside, the family looked stable. But inside that house, Andrea Yates was fighting a battle that would ultimately consume everything. Andrea had been struggling with severe psychiatric illness for years before June of 2001. Her mental health history was not hidden. It was documented. It was known to her doctors, known to her husband, and known to at least some members of her extended family. She had been hospitalized multiple times. She had been diagnosed with postpartum depression following the birth of her 4th child, Luke. She had attempted to end her own life on at least 2 separate occasions. She had been treated with powerful antipsychotic medications including Haldol, which had shown some effectiveness, and then had those medications adjusted in ways that mental health experts would later argue contributed directly to her deterioration. In the weeks leading up to June 20th, 2001, those who knew Andrea described a woman who was barely functioning. She was not sleeping. She was not eating properly. She was reportedly filling the bathtub with water and then draining it repeatedly, a behavior that investigators and mental health professionals would later point to as a deeply troubling warning sign. Her family physician, Dr. Mohammed Saeed, had seen her just 2 days before the tragedy. He had made the decision not to rehospitalize her. That decision would later become one of the most scrutinized medical judgments in the history of Houston's mental health community. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Russell Yates left for work at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. His mother was scheduled to arrive at the house at 10 o'clock to help with the children. In that 1-hour window, the irreversible happened. What investigators reconstructed from the evidence, and from Andrea's own account to law enforcement, was a sequence of events that Harris County prosecutors, defense attorneys, and mental health experts would spend years analyzing in 2 separate trials. Andrea Yates called 911 at approximately 9:48 in the morning. The call was brief. She asked for both police and an ambulance to come to her address. She also called her husband at NASA and told him to come home. When Harris County law enforcement officers arrived at 942 Beachcomber Lane, they entered a house where the unthinkable had occurred. 4 of the 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, and Luke, were found in the master bedroom. The youngest child, Mary, was found in the bathtub. The Harris County Medical Examiner's Office would later determine that all 5 children had lost their lives by drowning. Their ages ranged from 6 months to 7 years. The oldest child, Noah, showed evidence consistent with a struggle, which investigators noted in the case record. Andrea Yates was taken into custody without resistance. She was calm. She was compliant. She answered investigators' questions in a manner that law enforcement described as flat and disconnected. She told them what she had done. She told them why she believed she had done it. And what she said in those early interviews would become central to one of the most significant legal battles in Texas criminal history. Andrea Yates told investigators that she believed she was a bad mother. She told them that she believed her children were not developing correctly spiritually and morally because of her failures as a parent. She told them that Satan had been speaking to her. She told them that she believed her children would be better off in heaven than living under her care. These were not statements made to avoid responsibility. Mental health experts who evaluated her over the course of both trials were nearly unanimous in their assessment. Andrea Yates was in the grip of a complete psychotic break. She was not in contact with reality in any meaningful clinical sense at the time of the events of June 20th, 2001. Harris County prosecutors, however, argued in the first trial, which took place in 2002, that Yates knew the difference between right and wrong at the time of the offense. Under Texas law, the legal standard for the insanity defense requires that the defendant, due to severe mental disease or defect, did not know that her conduct was wrong. Prosecutors pointed to evidence that they argued demonstrated awareness, including the fact that Yates had called 911 immediately after the events, which they characterized as evidence that she understood the gravity of what had occurred. The jury in the 2002 trial agreed with the prosecution. Andrea Yates was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The case did not end there. In 2005, the Texas First Court of Appeals reversed the conviction. The reversal was based on false testimony given by prosecution expert witness Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist who had told the jury that an episode of the television program Law and Order had depicted a scenario nearly identical to the Yates case and had aired shortly before the events of June 2001. That episode did not exist. The testimony was factually incorrect, and the court found that it may have influenced the jury. A new trial was ordered. The retrial took place in 2006. A different jury heard the same core facts, the same evidence, the same medical records, the same testimony about Andrea's psychiatric history, and reached a different conclusion. On July 26, 2006, the jury found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity. She was not released. She was immediately transferred to Kerrville State Hospital in Kerrville, Texas, where she has remained ever since under civil commitment. She receives ongoing psychiatric treatment. She is not free. She is not in prison. She is in a mental health institution where the court determined she belongs. The legacy of the Andrea Yates case in Harris County and in the broader national conversation around maternal mental health cannot be overstated. The case became the catalyst for a significant expansion of postpartum mental health awareness programs across Texas and the United States. Organizations that advocate for mothers suffering from postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis point to the Yates case as the moment when the medical community, the legal community, and the public were forced to confront the reality that postpartum psychiatric illness is not sadness. It is not stress. In its most severe form, it is a complete break from reality that can have catastrophic consequences without proper identification, treatment, and support. In Harris County specifically, the case prompted reviews of psychiatric hospitalization protocols, medication management practices, and the standards used to evaluate whether patients pose a danger to themselves or others. The question of why Andrea Yates was not hospitalized in the days before June 20th, 2001, despite her documented deterioration, became a defining question not just for her legal case, but for the entire mental health system in Houston. The 5 children at the center of this case, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary Yates, were real people. Noah was 7 years old and had reportedly been learning to read. John was 5. Paul was 3. Luke was 2. Mary was 6 months old. They were children who deserved protection, stability, and the chance to grow up. Their lives were cut short not by an act of malice in the traditional criminal sense, but by a catastrophic failure of mental health intervention at the most critical possible moment. Holding space for the full complexity of that truth, honoring the children while also acknowledging the psychiatric reality of what happened, is not a comfortable task, but it is a necessary one. The Harris County District Attorney's Office, the defense team, the mental health professionals, the advocates, and the community members who followed this case for years all share the same goal when they speak about its legacy, that the systems designed to protect vulnerable people must be stronger. That warning signs must be acted upon. That a mother in psychotic crisis is a medical emergency, not a failure of character. And that 5 children who lived on Beachcomber Lane in the Clear Lake area of Houston, Texas, deserved a world that recognized that emergency in time to save them. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, postpartum depression, or any form of psychiatric distress, please reach out to the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are not alone, and help is available. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you why accountability and awareness matter, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment below telling us what you think, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support keeps this channel going and keeps these stories being told. Case 2, Gloria Y. Williams, November 2020, discovery October 24, 2021, Harris County, Houston, Texas. There is a particular category of case in the Harris County criminal justice system that investigators describe as cases that take time to fully comprehend. Not because the facts are complicated, but because the facts are so deeply disturbing in their human dimension that even experienced law enforcement professionals find themselves stepping back from the file and asking how this could have happened in plain sight. The case documented under Harris County court records involving Gloria Y. Williams and the death of 8-year-old Kendrick Lee is precisely that kind of case. It is a case about a child who was failed by every system that was supposed to protect him. It is a case about a household in which unspeakable harm was permitted to occur while the outside world remained unaware. And it is a case that resulted, finally, in a legal reckoning. Though for many in the Houston community who followed it, no sentence could fully address what Kendrick Lee was put through in the final months of his life. The foundation of this case begins with a Houston household that, for a period of nearly a year, existed in a state of almost complete isolation from the outside world. Gloria Y. Williams was the mother of 4 boys. At the time the events relevant to this case began in November of 2020, the boys ranged in age from approximately 7 to 15 years old. Kendrick Lee, age 8, was one of those children. Williams also had a romantic partner, a man named Brian Coulter, who lived in or was regularly present at the household. In November of 2020, Kendrick Lee lost his life. The manner of his death, as determined by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, was the result of injuries inflicted by Brian Coulter. The specific nature of those injuries, as documented in court records and reported by Houston area news organizations including the Houston Chronicle and ABC 13, reflected a pattern of severe harm that had been ongoing in the household. Kendrick did not receive emergency medical care. He did not receive intervention from any outside party. What happened in that apartment in November of 2020 occurred in complete isolation, and then it was concealed. What makes this case uniquely devastating in the Harris County record is what came next. After Kendrick lost his life, Gloria Williams and Brian Coulter did not report his death to authorities. They did not call emergency services. They did not seek help. Instead, according to investigators, they concealed Kendrick's remains in the apartment and continued living. Not for a few days, not for a few weeks, for months. The 3 surviving brothers, who were 15, 10, and 7 years old, remained in that apartment throughout this period. And then, according to the case record, the adults left. Gloria Williams and Brian Coulter departed the household entirely, leaving the 3 surviving children alone in an apartment where their brothers' remains were present. The 3 boys were alone in that apartment for a period that investigators described as spanning months. They were not attending school regularly. They were not being supervised by any adult. They were not receiving consistent food, medical care, or any of the basic necessities that children require. Neighbors in the apartment complex would later tell reporters that they had seen the children but had not known the full extent of what was happening inside the unit. The complex nature of poverty, community isolation, and the barriers that sometimes prevent neighbors from intervening in situations they sense but cannot fully see was documented repeatedly in coverage of this case. On October 24, 2021, law enforcement officers conducting a welfare check at the apartment made the discovery that would bring this case into public awareness. Inside the apartment, investigators found the skeletal remains of Kendrick Lee. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences would later complete the forensic analysis of the remains that confirmed the identity and the cause and manner of death. They also found the 3 surviving brothers, alive, but in a state of profound neglect and trauma that would require extensive intervention and support. The investigation that followed was conducted by the Houston Police Department and the Harris County District Attorney's Office. Brian Coulter was identified as the person directly responsible for the physical harm that caused Kendrick's death. He was charged accordingly. Gloria Williams, as the mother and the person legally responsible for the care and safety of her children, faced her own legal accountability. The charge against her reflected the role she played, not as the direct perpetrator of the physical harm, but as a mother who had failed to protect her child, who had concealed his death, and who had abandoned the surviving children in circumstances of extreme danger and neglect. The legal proceedings in this case extended over several years. Gloria Williams ultimately entered a guilty plea. The charge to which she pleaded guilty was injury to a child, serious bodily injury. On a date in November of 2024, Harris County District Court handed down the sentence, 50 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The sentence reflected the gravity of Williams' role in the events that led to Kendrick's death and in the subsequent harm caused to her surviving children. The case drew significant attention from child welfare advocates across Texas. The questions raised by this case about child protective services monitoring, school attendance tracking, and the mechanisms available to identify children in crisis situations prompted public discussion about how systems could be strengthened. When a child of school age stops appearing in public, stops attending school, and disappears from the community record for an extended period, there should be systems capable of recognizing that disappearance and responding to it. Kendrick Lee fell through every one of those systems. His case became a reference point for advocates arguing that earlier and more robust intervention protocols could save lives. Brian Coulter faced separate criminal proceedings for his role in Kendrick's death. The full extent of his legal accountability was addressed in Harris County Court as a separate matter from the proceedings against Williams. The three surviving brothers were placed into the care of the Texas child welfare system following the events of October 2021. Their journey toward healing and stability, the kind of support that every child deserves and that Kendrick never received, became part of the broader human story that communities across Houston held on to as they processed this case. Those children survived circumstances that no child should ever have to face. Their resilience, and the responsibility of the community to support them, is part of the legacy of this case. Kendrick Lee was 8 years old. He was a child who deserved the most basic and fundamental protection that a parent is obligated to provide. He deserved safety. He deserved medical care. He deserved the chance to grow up. His name should be remembered not as a case file number, but as a child who mattered, who was loved by people who grieve him still, and whose story demands that we take seriously the responsibility every adult bears for the safety and well-being of children in their care. The accountability delivered in Harris County District Court in November of 2024 cannot restore what was lost, but it stands as the justice system's formal declaration that Kendrick Lee's life had value, that what happened to him was wrong, and that those responsible for his safety, who failed him, will be held to account. That declaration matters. It is not enough, but it matters. If you know a child who may be in danger, who has stopped appearing in public, or who shows signs of neglect or harm, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. You may be the one person who makes the difference. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the children in your own community who need advocates, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Kendrick's story deserves to be heard, and your support helps make sure it is. Case 3. Ashley Auzenne, October 29, 2019, Harris County, Houston, Texas. The community of Deer Park, Houston, Texas, sits within Harris County, approximately 20 miles southeast of downtown Houston. It is a working-class community. It is a community of families, neighbors, and people who, by and large, know each other's names. It is the kind of community where children play in driveways and parents wave to each other from across the street. It is not the kind of community that expects to find itself at the center of a tragedy that would be covered by news organizations across the state of Texas. But on the morning of October 29, 2019, the community of Deer Park was changed in a way that its residents have never fully moved past. Ashley Auzenne was a resident of Deer Park. She was the mother of 3 children: Parrish, age 11, Eleanor, age 9, and Lincoln, age 7. By the standards of outward observation, the Auzenne family was, like so many families at the center of these cases, not obviously flagged as a household in crisis. Neighbors, acquaintances, and community members who spoke to reporters in the days following October 29th described Ashley Auzenne in terms that reflected their genuine shock. She was described as a mother. She was described as present in the community. She was described as someone who, to the eyes of those around her, appeared to be raising her children in ordinary circumstances. What was happening beneath the surface of that ordinary appearance was a depth of private pain and crisis that, as investigators and mental health professionals would later work to reconstruct, had been building for a significant period of time before it reached its devastating conclusion. The full psychiatric and personal history of Ashley Auzenne was examined as part of the investigative process that followed October 29, 2019. What that examination revealed was a portrait of a woman who had been suffering and who had not received the kind of intervention and support that might have altered the outcome. On the morning of October 29, 2019, Harris County law enforcement received a call that brought officers to the Auzenne residence in Deer Park. What they found when they arrived was a scene that the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office, in its official findings, classified as a murder-suicide. Ashley Auzenne had used a firearm to end the lives of her 3 children, Parrish, Eleanor, and Lincoln, and had then taken her own life. The children ranged in age from 7 to 11 years old. The youngest, Lincoln, was in the 2nd grade. The middle child, Eleanor, was in the 4th grade. The oldest, Parrish, was in the 6th grade. They were children who went to school in Deer Park, children whose teachers and classmates knew them, children whose absence from school on the Monday after that October weekend would be noticed immediately and devastatingly. The Harris County Medical Examiner conducted the official investigation and rendered the determination of murder-suicide. The Deer Park Police Department, which handles law enforcement for the community within Harris County, investigated the scene and the background of the case in coordination with county authorities. The investigation into the circumstances that preceded October 29th included an examination of Ashley Auzenne's mental health history, her personal circumstances, any recent changes in her life situation, and any documented warning signs that might have been visible in the period leading up to the events of that morning. The case record, as reported by Houston area news organizations including KSAT and Click 2 Houston, did not produce evidence of prior criminal conduct by Auzenne. It produced evidence of a woman in profound psychological distress who had not been reached by whatever support systems might have made a difference. The specifics of her mental health history, her relationships, and the precise sequence of circumstances that led to the morning of October 29th have been discussed in the context of victim advocacy and mental health awareness efforts in Harris County in the years since. What the broader community of Deer Park and Harris County has grappled with in the years following this case is a question that comes up again and again in the context of family tragedies of this nature. How do we identify a parent who is suffering to the point of crisis? How do we build the kind of community structures, the kind of mental health access, the kind of school and neighborhood and church and workplace networks that catch someone before they reach the point of no return? The answer to those questions is not simple, but the asking of them is necessary. The Deer Park Independent School District, which Parrish, Eleanor, and Lincoln attended, was deeply affected by this case. School communities in Harris County that experience the sudden loss of students carry that loss in a way that is specific and lasting. Teachers who had these children in their classrooms, classmates who had played with them and learned beside them, and school administrators who had known the family were all part of a community that had to process a grief for which there is no adequate preparation. Parrish Auzenne was 11 years old. He was on the cusp of middle school, the age at which children begin to develop a clearer sense of who they are and who they want to become. Eleanor was 9, by accounts from those who knew the family, a bright and expressive child. Lincoln was 7, barely past the beginning of formal schooling, at an age when the world is still largely defined by the safety and predictability of home and family. All 3 children lost their lives in the place where they were supposed to be safest, their own home, in the care of the person most responsible for their protection. The ruling of the Harris County Medical Examiner, murder-suicide, closed the criminal investigation in a formal legal sense because the person responsible for the harm to the children did not survive. There was no trial. There was no sentencing. There was no courtroom in which the full story was laid out for a jury. What there was, instead, was a community left to process an enormous grief and an enormous set of questions without the framework that a criminal proceeding sometimes provides. That absence of a legal process makes the case harder in some ways for communities to find closure. The accountability piece, the public reckoning, the formal assignment of responsibility, does not exist in the same way it does in cases that result in prosecution and sentencing. What does exist is the memory of 3 children. Parrish, Eleanor, and Lincoln Auzenne were real. They were present in their community. They were known and loved and are mourned. Their lives, however brief, had meaning and weight and impact on everyone who knew them. The tragedy of October 29, 2019, in Deer Park, Harris County, Texas, is ultimately about them. About who they were and what the world lost when they were taken. Child safety resources exist for families and individuals who recognize a crisis before it becomes irreversible. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988 are both available around the clock. If you know someone who is struggling, please reach out. Please tell someone. Please act. Because sometimes acting is the only thing that changes the outcome. If this case resonated with you, if it made you think about the importance of community awareness and mental health support, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These children deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep their stories alive. Case 4. Sheborah Latrice Thomas, August 12, 2016, Harris County, Houston, Texas. Houston's 3rd Ward is one of the most historically significant neighborhoods in the city. It is a community with deep roots, a community that has produced leaders, artists, educators, and advocates for generations. It is a community with a strong sense of identity and a strong sense of what it means to look out for one another. It is a community where children grow up with a connection to their neighborhood, their neighbors, and their history. It is, by any measure, a community that cares about its children. And that is exactly why the events of August 12, 2016, struck the 3rd Ward with a particular force, because what happened on that day was a violation not just of 2 individual lives, but of everything that community stands for when it comes to protecting its most vulnerable. Sheborah Latrice Thomas was a resident of the 3rd Ward area of Houston, Harris County, Texas. She was the mother of 2 children, Araylon, age 7, and Kayla, age 5. The events of August 12, 2016, occurred inside the Thomas family home, in a bathtub that should have been a place of routine domestic safety. What happened in that bathtub instead became the subject of a Harris County criminal investigation that would ultimately result in a guilty plea and a 40-year prison sentence. A legal outcome that took nearly 7 years to reach, but that, when it arrived in February of 2023, sent a clear message about the value Harris County places on the lives of children. The details of what occurred on August 12, 2016, were reconstructed by the Houston Police Department and the Harris County District Attorney's Office through the course of a thorough investigation. What investigators determined was that Sheborah Thomas had taken the lives of her 2 children, Araylon and Kayla, by drowning them in the bathtub of the family home. After the children lost their lives in the Thomas home, their bodies were not reported to authorities. Instead, according to the findings of the investigation, the children's remains were concealed beneath the home of a neighbor. Law enforcement officials would later discover the remains in that location as part of the active investigation. The discovery of the children's remains, and the circumstances under which they were hidden, formed a critical part of the case that Harris County prosecutors would build against Sheborah Thomas in the years following the crime. The act of concealment demonstrated, investigators argued, an awareness of wrongdoing that was highly relevant to the legal proceedings. The fact that the children's bodies were not discovered immediately, that they were hidden in a manner designed to delay or prevent their discovery, meant that the full scope of what had happened on August 12, 2016, did not become publicly known right away. The timeline between the crime in August of 2016 and the final legal resolution in February of 2023 reflects the complexity of major felony proceedings in Harris County District Court. Investigations of this nature, involving the deaths of children, forensic analysis of remains, the establishment of cause and manner of death by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, and the building of a prosecutable case, take time. The Harris County District Attorney's Office pursued the case methodically and thoroughly, gathering the evidence and constructing the legal framework necessary to bring Sheborah Thomas to a courtroom. The psychiatric and personal history of Sheborah Thomas was examined as part of the investigative and pretrial process. The case record does not reflect a mental health defense of the kind that characterized the Andrea Yates case. What it reflects, instead, is a set of circumstances, personal, relational, and situational, that investigators and prosecutors addressed through the lens of criminal accountability rather than psychiatric illness. The distinction matters in terms of the legal outcome. Sheborah Thomas did not argue that she lacked the mental capacity to understand the wrongfulness of her actions. She ultimately entered a guilty plea. The guilty plea to 2 counts of murder was entered in Harris County District Court. On a date in February of 2023, Judge Ramona Franklin of the Harris County District Court accepted the plea and imposed the sentence, 40 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The sentence is to run concurrently on both counts. Under Texas law, Sheborah Thomas will not be eligible for parole consideration for a minimum of 20 years. She was taken directly into the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to begin serving that sentence. For the Third Ward community, and for Houston at large, the resolution of this case in February of 2023 was a moment of formal accountability that had been a long time coming. 7 years is a long time to wait for a legal reckoning. 7 years is a long time for the families and community members who knew Raylon and Kayla to live without the formal declaration from the justice system that what happened to those children was wrong and that it would be punished. The guilty plea and the 40-year sentence provided that declaration. It did not bring the children back. It did not erase 7 years of unresolved grief. But it provided something, a formal, documented, public acknowledgement that Raylon Thomas, age 7, and Kayla Thomas, age 5, had value, that their lives mattered, that the law of Harris County, Texas, would hold accountable anyone who took those lives. Raylon was 7 years old in the summer of 2016, a child at the age of learning, discovering, and beginning to build the foundations of a self. Kayla was 5, barely old enough for kindergarten, at the age when children are just beginning to understand the broader world beyond their immediate family. Both children were robbed of every year, every experience, and every possibility that lay ahead of them. The community of the Third Ward, the city of Houston, and Harris County have not forgotten them. Their names are part of the permanent record of this city's history, and that record demands that they be treated with the full dignity and respect they deserved in life. The legacy of this case in Harris County has contributed to ongoing conversations about child welfare monitoring in Houston neighborhoods, about the warning signs that communities, schools, and service providers should be trained to recognize, and about the importance of neighbors, family members, and community contacts being willing to act on concerns about children's welfare before a tragedy occurs. No community wants to be in the position of asking, after the fact, what more could have been done. The work of prevention, the building of communities where children are safe, where adults in crisis receive support, and where warning signs do not go unaddressed, is the work that honors the memory of Raylon and Kayla Thomas. If you have concerns about a child's safety in your community, please do not hesitate to contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD or your local Child Protective Services office. Every report matters. Every intervention is a potential lifesaver. If this story moved you to think about justice, accountability, and the protection of children in your community, please like this video, drop a comment below telling us your thoughts, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These 2 children deserve to be remembered, and together we can make sure they are. Case 5, Kayla Holzendorf, March 23, 2021, Harris County, Houston, Texas. There is a category of case in child welfare and criminal justice that advocates and investigators sometimes describe as the most difficult to process emotionally, not because the facts are unclear, but because the victim was so completely dependent on the very people who caused them harm. When a child is young enough that their entire world is defined by the adults who care for them, when they have no ability to seek help on their own, no ability to report what is happening to them, and no ability to escape, the weight of the community's responsibility to that child becomes absolute. The case documented in Harris County court records involving 8-year-old Keontae Holzendorf, and the indictment of his mother Kayla Holzendorf and her common-law husband Dominique Lewis for capital murder, is one of the cases that Houston's child welfare community has cited repeatedly as a demonstration of why that responsibility must be taken seriously and why the consequences of failing to uphold it must be equally serious. On March 23, 2021, Houston Police Department officers responded to a call reporting an unresponsive child at a motel in the Houston area. The motel was not a family home. It was not a stable residential environment. It was a transient location, the kind of setting that, for families living in poverty or in unstable circumstances, sometimes becomes the only available place to stay. When officers arrived at the location, they found 8-year-old Keontae Holzendorf unresponsive in a bathtub. Emergency medical services were called. Keontae was transported to a hospital. Despite the efforts of medical personnel, he did not survive. He was 8 years old. The investigation that followed the discovery of Keontae on March 23, 2021, was conducted by the Houston Police Department's Homicide Division in coordination with the Harris County District Attorney's Office. What investigators found as they worked through the physical evidence, the forensic medical analysis, and the witness accounts available to them was a picture that horrified even experienced law enforcement professionals. The injuries documented on Keontae's body by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences reflected a pattern of harm that had not occurred in a single incident. The evidence pointed to a prolonged period during which the child had been subjected to conditions of extreme cruelty and deprivation by the adults responsible for his care. Specifically, investigators found evidence, documented in the case record and reported by Houston area news organizations including the Houston Chronicle and KHOU 11, that Keontae had been restrained. Duct tape had been used. The child had also been subjected to other forms of physical restraint and harm that the forensic examination documented in clinical detail. This was not an accident. This was not a single isolated incident of losing control. What the evidence showed was a sustained pattern of behavior directed at a child who had no means of protecting himself and no avenue of escape. Kayla Holzendorf, who was Keontae's mother and therefore his primary legal guardian, and the person most fundamentally responsible for his safety and well-being, was investigated alongside Dominique Lewis, her common-law husband. The investigation established, to the satisfaction of a Harris County grand jury, that both adults bore criminal responsibility for what had happened to Keontae. In February of 2022, the Harris County grand jury returned indictments against both Kayla Holzendorf and Dominique Lewis on the charge of capital murder. Capital murder in Texas is the most serious charge in the criminal code. It carries the potential for either a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or, depending on the circumstances and the decision of the district attorney's office, the death penalty. The indictment of both Holzendorf and Lewis for capital murder in connection with the death of 8-year-old Keontae sent a clear signal from Harris County's prosecutorial community about how seriously this case was being treated. The proceedings in this case have continued through the Harris County District Court system following the February 2022 indictments. Major felony cases of this complexity, involving capital charges, forensic evidence, and multiple defendants, move through the court system over an extended period. As of the most recent available public record, the prosecution of this case in Harris County remains active. What the Keontae Holzendorf case has contributed to the ongoing public discourse in Houston about child safety is substantial. Child welfare advocates in Harris County have pointed to this case as a demonstration of the particular vulnerability of children in transient or unstable living situations. Children who are not consistently visible to teachers, neighbors, school administrators, or other community members who might otherwise notice warning signs of abuse or neglect. When a family is living in a motel, when a child is not attending school regularly, when there is no stable community network around them, the opportunities for outside intervention are dramatically reduced. Building systems that can reach those children, that can identify them and create pathways for help, is one of the central challenges that the Keontae Holzendorf case has placed before the Houston community. Keontae Holzendorf was 8 years old. He was a child who should have been in the 3rd grade. He should have been learning multiplication tables and reading chapter books and playing with friends. Instead, in the final period of his life, he was in circumstances of danger and suffering that no child should ever face. He deserved better. He deserved the protection that every child deserves, from the adults responsible for his care, from the systems designed to identify children in crisis, and from a community that takes seriously its collective responsibility for the welfare of its most vulnerable members. The criminal justice system in Harris County has taken the first formal steps toward accountability, in this case, through the capital murder indictments. The full legal resolution of the proceedings against Kayla Holzendorf and Dominique Lewis will continue to be a matter of public record in Harris County District Court, and the community will be watching. Keontae's story must not be forgotten. His name must be spoken, and the community response to what happened to him, in the form of stronger child welfare systems, better training for those who work with at-risk children, and a more robust network of support for families in crisis, is the work that honors his memory. Please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD if you ever have concerns about a child's welfare. The call is confidential. Your action could save a life. If this story made you feel the weight of what we owe to children in our communities, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Justice for Keontae matters, and your support helps amplify that message. Case 6. Lihui Liu, November 30th, 2018. Harris County, Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas, is one of the most ethnically and linguistically diverse cities in the United States. It is a city where communities from virtually every part of the world have built lives, raised families, and contributed to the extraordinary cultural fabric of one of America's great metropolitan centers. That diversity is one of Houston's greatest strengths. It is also, in the context of mental health awareness, one of the community's most important considerations, because mental illness does not recognize cultural boundaries, and because cultural and linguistic barriers can sometimes delay or prevent people from accessing the psychiatric care they desperately need. The case documented in Harris County records involving Lihui Liu and the death of her 5-year-old son Jiadong Su on November 30th, 2018, sits at the intersection of severe psychiatric illness, cultural isolation, and the devastating consequences of untreated mental disease. Lihui Liu and her family were part of Houston's Chinese immigrant community. She was the mother of 5-year-old Jiadong Su. By the accounts available in the public record, including reports from the Houston Police Department, the City of Houston official documentation, and local news coverage, Liu had been experiencing symptoms consistent with serious mental illness in the period leading up to the events of November 30th, 2018. The specific nature and duration of her psychiatric struggles, and the extent to which those around her were aware of them or able to access help for her, became central questions in the legal proceedings that followed. On November 30th, 2018, Jiadong Su's father arrived home to the family's residence in Houston and made a discovery in the family garage that law enforcement officers and forensic professionals described as one of the most disturbing scenes they had encountered. Jiadong's remains were found in the garage. The manner of the child's death, as determined by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, was drowning. The forensic examination also documented additional injuries to the child that reflected an act of extreme violence consistent with a complete break from reality on the part of the perpetrator. Lihui Liu was taken into custody by Houston Police Department officers. The investigation that followed immediately established Liu as the person responsible for Jiadong's death. The evidence at the scene, combined with Liu's own statements to law enforcement, made the question of factual responsibility clear from the outset. What was not clear, and what became the central issue in the legal proceedings, was whether Lihui Liu was mentally competent to stand trial for what she had done. In Texas, competency to stand trial is a legal standard separate from the insanity defense. A defendant is competent to stand trial if they have a sufficient present ability to consult with their attorney with a reasonable degree of rational understanding, and if they have a rational and factual understanding of the proceedings against them. Competency is a question about the defendant's mental state at the time of the trial, not at the time of the alleged offense. The insanity defense, by contrast, addresses the defendant's mental state at the time of the alleged offense. In the case of Lihui Liu, the competency question came before the Harris County District Court in 2019. The court ordered psychiatric evaluation of Liu by qualified forensic mental health professionals. The evaluation process produced findings that were presented to the court, and in 2019, a Harris County District Court judge made the legal determination that Lihui Liu was not competent to stand trial. She was found to lack the present mental ability to meaningfully participate in her own defense. The court ordered her committed to a Texas state mental hospital for treatment aimed at restoring her competency. The legal status of this case, whether Liu has been restored to competency, whether additional proceedings have taken place, and what the ultimate legal resolution of the Harris County case against her will be, has continued to develop within the court system. Competency restoration is an ongoing process, and cases in which defendants are found incompetent to stand trial can remain in the legal system for extended periods as treatment continues and periodic competency reviews are conducted. The case of Lihui Liu has been cited by mental health advocates in the Houston area as an important illustration of the particular challenges faced by immigrant communities in accessing psychiatric care. Barriers including language, cultural stigma around mental illness, lack of familiarity with the American mental health care system, immigration concerns, and financial constraints can all prevent people from seeking help before a crisis reaches a catastrophic point. In Chinese cultural contexts, as in many immigrant communities, mental illness has historically carried significant stigma, which can make individuals and families reluctant to acknowledge psychiatric symptoms, seek professional evaluation, or accept treatment. The question of what support systems existed for Liu in the period before November 30, 2018, what warning signs were visible, who was aware of them, and what options for intervention were available, is one that the Houston mental health community has engaged with seriously in the years since this case became part of the public record. Building mental health outreach capacity within immigrant communities, providing services in multiple languages, training community leaders and cultural liaisons to recognize psychiatric distress, and reducing the stigma that prevents people from seeking help. These are the interventions that advocates argue could prevent future tragedies of this kind. Jia Dongsu was 5 years old. He was a child of Houston's Chinese community, a child who had barely begun his education, a child at the age of wonder and discovery and boundless possibility. He is described in the community accounts surrounding this case as a bright and lively child. His father, who made the devastating discovery on November 30, 2018, has lived with that grief in the years since. His extended family, the Houston Chinese community, and the broader Houston public who followed this case have all carried the weight of what happened to him. The legal process in this case continues in Harris County. The accountability question, the formal legal reckoning for what happened to Jia Dongsu, remains open, subject to the ongoing competency review process in the Texas mental health and criminal justice system. That process may ultimately result in a trial. It may result in a different legal resolution depending on Liu's psychiatric trajectory. What it will not do is erase what happened or diminish the importance of Jia Dong's life. What the community can do, what Houston can do, in response to this case is work harder to ensure that no person suffering from severe psychiatric illness is left without access to evaluation, treatment, and support. That work is done one outreach program at a time, one community liaison at a time, one multilingual mental health clinic at a time. It is slow work, but it is necessary work. And Jia Dongsu's story is part of why it must be done. If you or someone in your family or community is experiencing symptoms of mental illness, please reach out to the Harris County Psychiatric Center at 713-752-5700 or contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-CHILD. Help is available, and asking for it is an act of strength. If this case made you reflect on mental health awareness and the importance of community support systems, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Jia Dong's story deserves to be told, and your support makes that possible. Case 7, Oninda Romelus, October 4, 2025, Brazoria County, Texas. The Houston metropolitan area extends well beyond the boundaries of Harris County. The communities that make up the greater Houston region, stretching south toward Brazoria County, west toward Fort Bend County, and in every direction across one of the largest metropolitan footprints in the United States, are bound together by geography, economy, culture, and, in cases like this one, by the shared experience of community tragedy that crosses county lines and resonates across the entire region. The case documented in Brazoria County court records involving Oninda Romelus and the events of October 4, 2025, in Angleton, Texas, is a case that the entire Houston metropolitan community has been confronting with grief, with outrage, and with a determination that the justice system must answer fully for the children who were harmed. Angleton, Texas, is the county seat of Brazoria County, located approximately 45 miles south of downtown Houston. It is a community deeply connected to the broader Houston region, economically, culturally, and in terms of the daily lives of the families who live there. Oninda Romelus was a resident of this community. She was the mother of 4 children whose ages, as documented in the Brazoria County court record and reported by Fox 26 Houston and KHOU, included a 13-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, along with 2 additional children who survived the events of October 4, 2025. On October 4, 2025, law enforcement in Brazoria County received emergency calls related to a vehicle in Angleton. What officers found when they arrived at the scene was a situation of extreme severity involving children inside a vehicle. Oninda Romelus had discharged a firearm inside the vehicle in which her 4 children were present. The 13-year-old boy and the 3-year-old girl did not survive. 2 other children were struck by gunfire, but survived. The range of ages among the children, from a 3-year-old to a teenager, and the circumstances of what occurred inside that vehicle made this one of the most devastating events in the recent history of the Houston metropolitan region. Oninda Romelus was taken into custody at or near the scene. In statements to law enforcement investigators, Romelus reportedly indicated that she had intended for all 4 of her children to lose their lives in the incident. The nature of those statements, as documented in the Brazoria County case record and reported by regional news organizations, became central to the charging decision and the subsequent grand jury proceedings. The investigation was conducted by Brazoria County law enforcement in coordination with regional resources. Given the severity of the allegations, a mother opening fire on her own children inside a vehicle, and the deaths of 2 children and the wounding of 2 others, the investigative and prosecutorial response was immediate and thorough. The Harris County Medical Examiner System and its Brazoria County equivalents were engaged in the forensic analysis of the case. In December of 2025, a Brazoria County grand jury returned indictments against Oninda Romelus. The charges were serious and extensive. 2 counts of capital murder in connection with the deaths of the 13-year-old and the 3-year-old, and 2 counts of aggravated assault in connection with the injuries sustained by the 2 surviving children. Brazoria County District Court set bond at $14 million. Romelus has remained incarcerated pending the resolution of the criminal proceedings. Capital murder charges in Texas, as noted in the context of earlier cases in this documentary, carry the most severe penalties available under state law, including the potential for life imprisonment without parole or capital punishment, depending on the circumstances of the case and the prosecutorial decisions made by the Brazoria County District Attorney's Office. The filing of 2 capital murder counts against Romelus, in addition to 2 aggravated assault counts, reflects the full scope of what investigators and prosecutors allege occurred on October 4, 2025. The case is ongoing in the Brazoria County District Court system as of the current record. Major capital cases move through the Texas court system over an extended timeline, involving pretrial proceedings, discovery, potential motions related to mental health evaluations, and the complex procedural requirements of capital-level prosecution. The Houston metropolitan community and the Angleton community specifically have been watching the progress of these proceedings with the full weight of the tragedy that occurred in their midst. The 2 children who did not survive the events of October 4, 2025, a 13-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, represent 2 ends of a spectrum of childhood. The 13-year-old was at the threshold of adolescence, the age of developing independence, identity, and the beginning of the journey toward adulthood. The 3-year-old was barely beyond toddlerhood, an age of complete dependence and boundless trust in the adults responsible for her care. Both children were inside a vehicle that should have been a safe space. Both children were with their mother. Both children are gone. The 2 surviving children, who were injured in the incident and who witnessed what occurred inside that vehicle, face a journey toward healing that will require sustained, compassionate, and expert support. The trauma they carry is unimaginable. The responsibility of the Houston metropolitan community, of Brazoria County's child welfare and mental health systems, and of every support network available in the region to stand behind those two children as they work through what they have experienced is both a legal and a moral obligation. The community of Angleton, the broader Brazoria County region, and the Houston metropolitan area have come together in the aftermath of this case to mourn the children who were lost, to support the children who survived, and to demand answers about what warning signs may have been present, about what mental health resources were or were not available, and about how the system can better respond to families in crisis before a tragedy of this scale occurs. The legal proceedings against Oninda Romelus will play out in the Brazoria County justice system. The community will continue to follow them. And the names and memories of the two children who did not come home from that vehicle on October 4th, 2025, will remain part of the permanent record of the Houston region's grief and its commitment to protecting children. If you are concerned about a child's safety or know a family that may be in crisis, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. You can make a difference. Please do not wait. If this story struck you, if you are thinking about those children and about the importance of advocacy and awareness, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These children matter. Your support keeps their stories alive. Case 8. Gabriela Elyzabeth Deras, August 8, 2023, Harris County, Houston, Texas. Houston summers are among the most intense in the continental United States. The combination of heat and humidity that settles over the city from late May through September produces temperatures that regularly reach into the upper 90s and beyond, with heat indexes that push conditions to genuinely dangerous levels. Public health officials in Harris County issue regular advisories about the dangers of heat exposure during these months, particularly for the elderly, for people with certain medical conditions, and for the most vulnerable of all, infants and young children, whose thermoregulatory systems are immature and who are completely dependent on the adults around them to keep them safe from extreme temperatures. The case documented in Harris County court records involving Gabriela Elyzabeth Deras and the death of her 2-month-old son Ethan on August 8, 2023, is a case in which that dependence, and the catastrophic failure to honor it, resulted in a tragedy that the Houston community has not forgotten. Gabriela Elyzabeth Deras was a resident of Harris County, Texas. She was the mother of Ethan Deras, an infant who was 2 months old at the time of the events of August 8, 2023. Ethan was at the age of complete and total dependence, too young to communicate his distress, too young to move, too young to do anything other than trust that the adult responsible for him would keep him safe. He could not survive without active care and protection. Every aspect of his safety was in the hands of his mother. On August 8, 2023, Gabriela Deras left her vehicle in a parking lot in the Houston area while she attended a mental health clinic appointment inside an adjacent facility. Ethan was in the vehicle. He was left in the vehicle for a period that investigators determined was approximately 3 hours. It was August in Houston. The interior temperature of a vehicle parked in the Houston summer sun rises to levels that are lethal within a matter of minutes for an infant. And within the 3-hour window during which Ethan was left in the vehicle, the conditions inside that car became unsurvivable. When Ethan was removed from the vehicle and emergency medical services were called, the forensic documentation of his condition reflected the severity of what he had been subjected to. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences conducted the autopsy and forensic analysis of Ethan's death. The findings included documentation that the infant's internal body temperature at the time of examination had reached 108 degrees Fahrenheit. That figure is not a data point that can be easily processed in the abstract. It represents the physical reality of what extreme heat exposure does to an infant's body, a reality that is both medically precise and humanly devastating. The manner of Ethan's death was determined by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences to be homicide. The cause of death was hyperthermia, heat exposure. The ruling of homicide rather than accident reflects the forensic and investigative determination that the circumstances of Ethan's death were not the result of a brief, unforeseeable lapse, but rather of a prolonged period of neglect for which a responsible adult was accountable under the law. That ruling triggered the criminal investigation that would ultimately lead to the arrest and charging of Gabriela Deras. The investigation was conducted by the Houston Police Department. The timeline between the events of August 8, 2023, and the arrest of Gabriela Deras in August of 2024, a period of approximately 12 months, reflects the thoroughness of the investigative process in cases of this kind. Investigators in cases involving the deaths of children are expected to build a complete and meticulous evidentiary record before charges are filed. The forensic analysis, the medical records, the documentation of the timeline of events, the review of any surveillance footage, and the analysis of Deras' specific circumstances, including the fact that she was at a mental health clinic at the time of the events, all required careful examination. The fact that Gabriela Deras was attending a mental health appointment at the time Ethan was left in the vehicle raised questions during the investigative period about whether her mental health circumstances were relevant to the criminal charges. Under Texas law, mental health history can be relevant to both competency determinations and to the potential use of an insanity defense, frameworks similar to those discussed in other cases in this documentary. The investigation took these factors into account, while ultimately resulting in the August 2024 arrest of Deras and the filing of a charge of murder against her. The charge of murder in Texas requires proof that a person intentionally or knowingly caused the death of an individual, and this is the framework most relevant in cases involving neglect, that the person caused the death of an individual by intentionally or knowingly engaging in conduct that was clearly dangerous to human life. The latter standard, sometimes referred to as felony murder or reckless murder, depending on the specific charging theory, is the framework that covers situations in which a person does not necessarily intend a death, but engages in conduct that any reasonable person would recognize as creating an extreme and unjustifiable risk of death, particularly to a vulnerable person entirely in their care. Harris County prosecutors charged Deras accordingly. The case is ongoing in Harris County District Court. As with other cases of this kind, the full legal proceedings will include examination of the forensic evidence, the timeline of events, the medical findings, and any mental health factors relevant to the question of criminal culpability. The community is watching the proceedings with the full weight of what happened to Ethan on August 8, 2023. Ethan Deras was 2 months old. He had been alive for 60 days. He had never spoken a word, or taken a step, or held a toy, or laughed at a sound. He was at the beginning of life. His death on August 8, 2023, in the parking lot of a Houston area mental health clinic, in a vehicle heated to conditions incompatible with life, was the death of a child who never had the chance to be anything other than completely dependent on the person most responsible for his safety. That person failed him in the most final way possible. The case serves as a stark reminder of the danger of leaving children unattended in vehicles during Houston summers, a danger that public health officials, child safety organizations, and law enforcement regularly publicize, but that results, every year, in preventable tragedies. The message is simple and absolute. No child should ever be left in a vehicle unattended in any temperature, at any time, for any reason. If you witness a child alone in a vehicle in distress, call 911 immediately. Do not wait. Your action could save a life. Please also reach out to the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD if you ever have concerns about an infant or child's safety or welfare. If this story made you think about the vulnerability of the very youngest members of our community and the absolute responsibility we bear toward them, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Ethan's story deserves to be remembered, and your support helps make sure it is. Case 9, Destiny Campos, May 26, 2024, Harris County, Houston, Texas. In any discussion of the most heartbreaking categories of cases in Harris County's criminal justice record, cases involving infants, children who are literally weeks or months old, who have no capacity whatsoever for self-protection or communication, whose survival is 100% dependent on the adults around them at every moment, occupy a particular place. These are cases in which the gap between the vulnerability of the victim and the responsibility of the adult is absolute. There is no ambiguity about what an infant needs. There is no ambiguity about what constitutes a danger to an infant. and there is no ambiguity about what the law requires of the adults who bring a child into the world and assume legal and moral responsibility for that child's safety. The case documented in Harris County court records involving 4-month-old Brooklyn Fancher, and the charges filed against her mother Destiny Campos and her father Jeremy Fancher, is a case that Houston's child welfare and law enforcement communities have cited as a tragic illustration of what happens when a child's most basic needs are subordinated to adult desires. The events relevant to this case occurred on May 26, 2024. Destiny Campos, the mother of Brooklyn Fancher, was at a motel in the Houston area along with the infant and with Jeremy Fancher, Brooklyn's father. Brooklyn was 4 months old, an age at which an infant requires constant attention, regular feeding, monitoring, and the full, undivided awareness of the adults responsible for her care. She was entirely dependent. She could not call for help. She could not signal her distress in any way that would be audible outside the immediate vicinity. What the investigation determined, as documented in Harris County court records and reported by local Houston news organizations, was that Brooklyn Fancher was placed inside a closed dresser drawer in the motel room by the adults responsible for her care. The stated reason for placing her there, as reflected in the investigative record, was to allow the adults in the room to have uninterrupted private time. The infant was left in the closed drawer, where she was deprived of adequate oxygen. 4-month-old Brooklyn Fancher did not survive. She lost her life on May 26, 2024. The Houston Police Department's investigation into Brooklyn's death was thorough and resulted in findings that supported criminal charges against both adults present in the motel room. The cause and manner of death were determined by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences to be consistent with suffocation caused by the circumstances in which the infant was placed. The investigation established that both Destiny Campos and Jeremy Fancher bore criminal responsibility for Brooklyn's death. In June of 2025, both Destiny Campos and Jeremy Fancher were arrested by the Houston Police Department and charged with murder in connection with the death of Brooklyn Fancher. The filing of murder charges against both parents reflects the prosecutorial determination by the Harris County District Attorney's Office that the conduct of both adults on May 26, 2024, met the legal standard for criminal homicide. The case is currently in the pretrial phase in Harris County District Court. The community response to the Brooklyn Fancher case in Houston has reflected both deep grief and a strong sense of moral outrage, the kind of response that occurs when the facts of a case are both clear and incomprehensible in their human dimension. Brooklyn was 4 months old. She was alive. She was breathing. She was placed in circumstances from which she could not escape and in which she could not survive. The reason she was placed there, as reflected in the case record, was the convenience of the adults responsible for her. Child welfare advocates in Harris County have pointed to this case in discussions about the importance of education and support for new parents, particularly young parents, parents in unstable living situations, and parents who may be struggling with the demands of newborn care. Caring for an infant is among the most demanding responsibilities an adult can take on. The sleep deprivation, the relentlessness of an infant's needs, the stress of financial and housing instability, these factors can create conditions under which adults in crisis make catastrophic decisions. But the antidote to that crisis is not abandonment of the infant's needs. It is intervention, support services, family networks, social work resources, crisis nurseries that can provide relief for overwhelmed parents while keeping the infant safe. Harris County and the city of Houston have multiple resources available to parents who are struggling. The Texas Department of Family and Protective Services maintains a safe haven law that allows parents to surrender a newborn safely and legally at any hospital, fire station, or emergency medical services station without fear of prosecution. Parents who feel overwhelmed by the responsibilities of caring for an infant have options that do not involve putting that infant in danger. Those options must be more widely known, more easily accessible, and more consistently promoted by every community institution that interacts with new parents and young families. Brooklyn Fancher was 4 months old. She had a name. She had a face. She had a life ahead of her that was taken before it had barely begun. The justice system in Harris County is now in the process of formally addressing the criminal responsibility of the adults who were present when she lost her life. The proceedings against Destiny Campos and Jeremy Fancher will continue through the Harris County District Court, and the community will continue to watch with the full expectation that the law will speak clearly on behalf of a 4-month-old child who had no voice of her own. If you are a parent who is struggling, if you feel overwhelmed by the demands of caring for a young child, please reach out before a crisis becomes a tragedy. The Texas Safe Haven Hotline can be reached at 1-800-686-7743. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. Help is there. Please use it. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the most vulnerable children in our community and what we owe them, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Brooklyn deserved better. Your support makes sure her story is heard. Case 10, Melissa Towne, October 16, 2022, Harris County, Houston, Texas. There are cases in the Harris County criminal record that begin in places meant for joy. Spring Creek Park, located in the Spring area of Harris County just north of Houston, is a green space, a place where families go on weekends, where children play, where the ordinary pleasures of outdoor life in the Houston region take place against a backdrop of trees and open sky. It is a place where nothing terrible is supposed to happen. It is a place where a parent and child going for a walk on an October afternoon should be the most unremarkable scene imaginable. On October 16, 2022, Spring Creek Park became the location of one of the most deeply troubling cases in recent Harris County history, one that would ultimately wind through the court system for nearly 3 years before reaching a resolution that raised fundamental questions about mental illness, culpability, and the limits of the criminal justice system in responding to acts committed in the depths of psychiatric crisis. Melissa Towne was a resident of the Spring area of Harris County. She was the mother of a 5-year-old daughter whose name, as documented in the Harris County court record and reported by local news organizations covering the case, has been handled with sensitivity given the child's age and the family's privacy concerns. On October 16, 2022, Melissa Towne took her 5-year-old daughter to Spring Creek Park. What occurred in that park on that afternoon was discovered by law enforcement officers who responded to the area. Towne's 5-year-old daughter did not survive. The cause and manner of the child's death were determined by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. The specific nature of the injuries was documented in the forensic and court record. Melissa Towne was apprehended by law enforcement. In statements to investigators, statements that were documented in the case record and that became central to both the prosecution's case and the defense's arguments, she reportedly stated that her daughter was possessed by evil. She reportedly described her child in terms consistent with the kind of paranoid, delusional thinking that mental health professionals associate with severe psychotic illness. She did not attempt to flee the scene. She did not attempt to conceal what had occurred. The psychological presentation documented by law enforcement at the time of her apprehension was striking enough that mental health evaluation became an immediate priority in the case. The psychiatric evaluation process in the Melissa Towne case was extensive. Mental health professionals retained by both the prosecution and the defense examined Towne and her psychiatric history over the course of the legal proceedings. The Harris County District Court, where the case was prosecuted, oversaw a proceeding that ultimately hinged on the question of whether Towne, at the time of the events of October 16, 2022, knew that her conduct was wrong. Under Texas Penal Code Section 8.01, a person is not criminally responsible for conduct if, at the time of that conduct, as a result of severe mental disease or defect, she did not know that her conduct was wrong. The evidence presented at trial regarding Towne's mental state was the central contested issue in the proceedings. The defense presented evidence of severe psychiatric illness, evidence that, according to the forensic mental health professionals who testified, indicated that Towne's behavior on October 16, 2022, was the product of a complete psychotic break in which she was operating under a delusional belief system so consuming that she did not, in the clinical and legal sense, understand the wrongfulness of what she was doing. The prosecution challenged this assessment and argued for criminal accountability. In September of 2025, nearly 3 years after the events of October 16, 2022, the jury hearing the case in Harris County District Court returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. Melissa Towne was not convicted of a criminal offense. She was not released. Under Texas law, a defendant found not guilty by reason of insanity is subject to automatic civil commitment proceedings. Towne was civilly committed to a mental health facility, where she is receiving psychiatric treatment under the supervision of the Texas court system. The resolution of the Melissa Towne case in September of 2025 prompted significant public discussion in Harris County, the same kind of discussion that the Andrea Yates verdict produced in 2006. When a parent is found not guilty by reason of insanity for the death of a child, the community's grief does not disappear. The questions do not become simpler. What the verdict says, in legal terms, is that the criminal justice system, which is designed to assess and punish intentional wrongdoing, is not the right instrument for responding to an act committed in the complete absence of rational awareness. What it does not say is that the act was acceptable, that the child's life was less valuable, or that the system bears no responsibility for what happened. What the verdict demands is a different kind of response, one rooted not in punishment, but in psychiatric treatment, in monitoring, in the building of systems that identify people in psychiatric crisis before they reach the point of no return. The same question that arose in the Andrea Yates case more than 2 decades earlier, why was this person not in psychiatric care before the tragedy occurred, is a question that the Melissa Towne case places before Harris County and the Houston community again. It is not a comfortable question, but it is a necessary one. The 5-year-old daughter at the center of this case deserved protection. She deserved to grow up. She deserved the ordinary joys and challenges and discoveries of childhood. She was taken to a park on an October afternoon by the person most responsible for her safety, and she did not come home. The grief of everyone who loved her, her family, her extended community, the people in Harris County who followed this case through nearly 3 years of proceedings, is permanent and real. The legal system has rendered its judgment. The moral community has its own reckoning to hold. What that reckoning must produce, what the legacy of this case, and of the Andrea Yates case, and of every case in this documentary that involves severe psychiatric illness, is action. Action in the form of better mental health screening for parents. Action in the form of more accessible psychiatric care in Harris County and across Texas. Action in the form of reducing the stigma that prevents people from seeking help before their illness reaches a catastrophic level. Action in the form of building the kind of community infrastructure that catches people before they fall, before the park, before the bathtub, before the vehicle, before the moment that cannot be undone. The 10 cases documented in this episode of Cold Case Hour cover a period of more than 2 decades in Harris County and the greater Houston region. They involve women from different backgrounds, different communities, different circumstances, and different psychiatric profiles. What they share is the fact that at the center of each case is a child who deserved to be protected and was not. Children named Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary. Kendrick, Parrish, Eleanor, and Lincoln. Araylon and Kiana. Keontae. Jado. 2 children in a vehicle in Angleton. Ethan. Brooklyn. A 5-year-old in Spring Creek Park. These are not case file numbers. They are children. They were real. They had names and faces and futures. And the communities of Houston, Harris County, and the greater Texas region carry the responsibility of honoring their memory by working every single day to build a world where children are safer, where families in crisis receive help, and where the systems designed to protect the most vulnerable people in our society are strong enough to do that job. If you or someone you know needs help, whether that is mental health support, child welfare resources, crisis intervention, or simply a place to turn when things feel impossible, please reach out. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available at 1-800-4-CHILD, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline is available at 1-800-950-NAMI. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available around the clock. You are not alone. Help is real. Please ask for it. This has been Cold Case Hour. Every case you heard today is documented in Harris County and Brazoria County court records, law enforcement reports, and credible journalistic sources. This content is presented for educational and documentary purposes, with full respect and dignity for every victim and every family touched by these events. The goal of this channel is not sensationalism. It is not entertainment for its own sake. It is the belief that telling these stories, accurately, responsibly, and with full humanity, is part of how communities process grief, demand accountability, and build a better future. If this episode moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you why community awareness and child safety advocacy matter, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment telling us what you think and which case stayed with you, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Share this video with someone who cares about justice and truth. Your support is what makes this channel possible, and your engagement is what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. These children were real. Their lives mattered. And as long as this channel exists, their stories will be told.